Take a look at readers' comments on the website Inosmi, which translates Western news stories about Russia into the Russian language, and one thing quickly becomes clear. Russians from all walks of life and from across the political spectrum are often surprised about how their country is presented by Western media outlets. According to the comments on the news translation service, Britons and Americans, for example, are getting a biased and negative portrayal of what life is really like in Russia. A quick internet search could support this claim. Russia, according to the Western news agenda, is a nation of corruption, undemocratic, autocratic rule that is mired in social problems such as alcoholism. Where is the positive side of life? Ask those with concerns about Russia's international reputation. Or, at the very least, why does Western media only highlight the bad? Of course, there is another side to this argument, that the view of Western media is accurate on the whole, and Russians just don't like having the mirror held up to them. Perhaps even with such low levels of press freedom, according to media watchdogs, Russians are viewing their homeland through rose-tinted glasses. While this debate isn't likely to be solved anytime soon, it is pleasing to discover a Western television show that tries to provide more balanced coverage. The series is called Putin, Russia and the West, and it starts airing in Britain this week, as well as being picked up by many global broadcasters. The 4-part documentary series has been made by the British production company Brook Lapping. It has a track record of producing smart TV about recent history, with such shows as Iran and the West and The Death of Yugoslavia. This new show traces diplomatic relations between Russia and the West over the past decade or so. It covers the rise of Vladimir Putin, from his prime ministerial appointment by Boris Yeltsin to his current position as the unassailable strongman of Russian politics. It covers domestic issues such as Putin reining in the oligarchs, but the show's real strength is in narrating Russia's troubled relationship with the West. The documentary covers cordial periods, with Russia consoling America over the 9/11 attacks and even helping out with their war in Afghanistan. Remember that at one point, US President George W. Bush said he had looked into Putin's eyes and could see his Russian counterpart's soul. But the series also showcases big upsets, such as fallouts over the Georgia War and Bush's missile defense shield across Eastern Europe. And perhaps more interesting still are the people who tell the story. The show took some 3 years to produce, involving more than 100 off-the-record interviews and 65 on-camera, all of them with key political players. Big names include Condoleezza Rice, the US National Security Advisor, Sergei Ivanov, Russia's defense minister, and Sergei Lavrov, the country's foreign minister. The makers say they are trying to narrate events of recent years by getting inside the heads of decision-makers in Moscow and Washington. As the show demonstrates, the former Cold War rivals were communicating better, but still failed to really understand each other. So, will this documentary series resonate more with Russian audiences than other Western-produced shows? That question, sadly, is hard to answer because at present the series is not going to be screened in Russia at all. To find out more about this, I'm joined in the studio by Paul Mitchell, director of the series. Paul, is it fair to say that you were trying to tell a more balanced and nuanced version of events than has been tried by other Western journalists?
Well, I certainly don't want to criticize all my colleague journalists, but we were very lucky that we were given a very long time to make this series, over 3 years. We did lots and lots of preliminary work, lots of cross-checking and initial research interviews, then filmed interviews, then months of editing. So it really did give us the opportunity to try to really dive down deep. We want it to be fair. We want it to be multi-sided. We don't say that we're on this side, we're not on that side. What we want to do is give everybody the opportunity to say, this is how I saw this event, crucial event, turning point in history. This is what I did. This is what the other guy said. This is what I said in response or did in response.
And you did speak to a lot of people. If there's 3 things you can say about the series, it's got to be access, access, and access. Couple of names: Condoleezza Rice, the US National Security Advisor at the time, Sergei Ivanov, Russia's defense minister. Those are just two names. How did you get such an all-star cast?
You ask and ask and ask, and then, of course, you think we got great access. I keep thinking, oh, but look at all the ones we didn't get. So, it's always glass half full, glass half empty. But we came in, we did a series 20 years ago that was called The Second Russian Revolution, and have a certain reputation, I suppose, in Russia for this thing, and have done a lot of things subsequently. So we were able to go to both the Kremlin and people in the West and say, you know us, you know our work, you know that we've interviewed you before, you haven't been unhappy with the result, we're fair, we're accurate, this is serious history, this isn't just a fly-by-night TV show that everybody's going to forget about, this is the kind of stuff that scholars use as well as people watching it on television. And it's the usual thing. Once Sergei Ivanov knew that Condi Rice was going to be in it, he wanted to be in it because they were partners and adversaries at the same time and had quite a sparry but very, very good close relationship.
And so who didn't you get that you really wanted?
Who didn't we get? There were a few people in the Kremlin we didn't get. We desperately wanted President Obama, got very close, but in the end he seems to be running for re-election and rather busy. We wanted very much to get Putin himself, and we thought at some point he was going to do it, but he also seems to be now running for president. So it's these elections, they just get in the way.
Now, thanks to Brook Lapping Productions, we're able to play sections of some exclusive interviews from the series. The first one takes us back to May 2002, when Moscow and Washington were cooperating on weapons reduction schemes and relations were good. Bush, Putin and the president's wives were visiting St. Petersburg and attending a ballet, the Nutcracker. Joining them were Condoleezza Rice and Sergei Ivanov, who had struck up a friendship during the negotiations. And, as the show reveals, neither Rice nor Ivanov was particularly interested in Tchaikovsky. Here is how they explain events that evening.
I thought, it's summertime. Why are we seeing the Nutcracker?
I've seen the Nutcracker 2 or 3 times. My parents kept dragging me off to expose me to culture. I'd no desire to sit through the Nutcracker yet again. When the lights went down, I said to Condoleezza, do we really have to watch this? She said, what did you have in mind?
It turns out we share a love of ballet, but a dislike of classical ballet. And so he said, wouldn't you rather go to see Eichmann instead?
She looked around. The guards weren't paying attention. The presidents were glued to the Nutcracker.
We snuck out and went to the Eichmann studios. We did take Reinl, the National Security Advisor, with us. However, I don't think he likes ballet of any kind.
I could see that she liked it. You can't fake that sort of thing. When we knew the Nutcracker was almost over, we said goodbye.
And then before the lights came up, we snuck back in. I came to trust that Sergei Ivanov was someone who was going to deliver on what he said to do, and I think he believed the same about me. Personal relationships do matter.
That was Condoleezza Rice, US National Security Advisor, and Sergei Ivanov, Russia's defense minister, talking about their unusual night out at the ballet. It's a great political anecdote, one of many from the new television series Putin, Russia and the West. Paul, I'm sure it was wonderfully choreographed, if you'll pardon the pun, but how did that one come about?
Well, it's a really good example of how we work. We initially see people entirely off the record, which is we go and we talk to them, we take notes, and we don't record it and we don't use it unless they say it again when we come in with cameras. And we met Sergei Ivanov in Moscow. He told us the story about going off to the ballet. We then asked our film researchers, can you work out what the ballet was and where it was? And we went and got the footage. Once we'd done that, we went and had our interview with Condoleezza Rice, and we said, here's this footage. This is this time you went to the ballet with Sergei Ivanov. And there's a little episode in it where you can see the then Russian National Security Advisor, a man named Rushailo, sitting there at the avant-garde ballet looking incredibly unhappy. And I showed the footage to Condi, and I said, oh, God, look at Rushailo. And in the filmed interview, she was then able to say, and we brought the National Security Advisor, Rushailo, and you can see him looking very glum and bored, looking, like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. And she says very, very kind of dryly that I don't think he likes ballet of any sort. And it's perfect. You never, ever would get a chance to do that doing daily journalism, because you wouldn't have the opportunity, first, to have the research interview, secondly, to then look up and find the footage, and three, then go back to the other person and dovetail it all together. It was one of those times you think, oh, this is a sequence which is going to work.
Another section of the documentary takes us back to 2001. Responding to the 9/11 attacks, America has launched an offensive against the Taliban in Afghanistan. It's another moment from the film that demonstrates strong relations between Russia and the US, with Moscow not complaining about American forces using Central Asian military bases. And as Sergei Ivanov, Russia's defense minister at that time, explains in this clip, Russia received an interesting offer from the Taliban. Here is how Ivanov explains it.
It started on the 7th of October, President Putin's birthday. We were having dinner. We switched on the television. Nowadays, war is always televised. I said, this is a birthday present for you. Then a few days later, on the border between Tajikistan and Afghanistan, representatives of the Taliban contacted our border guards. Taliban said they had the authority to make us an offer from Mullah Omar. The message was, Russia and the Taliban should join forces against America. This was a real offer, an approach. We rejected it with the universal English term,
F off. That was Sergei Ivanov, Russia's defense minister, describing an unusual approach from the Taliban from the time that the US was invading Afghanistan. It comes from the new documentary series, Putin, Russia and the West, and I'm speaking with the series director, Paul Mitchell. Paul, that Russia-Taliban story, it's one that I've never heard before. Were you breaking news ground there?
Well, I don't know if anybody's ever told this story in public in any kind of detail. I had worked on previously a series about Iran and the West, and in the making of that series, I had read, one of the few people, as far as I know, read the autobiography of a man named John Bolton, who for a while was the American ambassador to the UN. And he had gone, when he was working in the State Department with Donald Rumsfeld, to Russia. And in his book, in a footnote, essentially, he said, Ivanov mentioned that the Taliban had made a pass at them and they had said no. So we asked Ivanov the story, and he told us, first again, off the record. Then we went to film him on the record, and he was, I have to admit, a little hesitant to repeat the exact words that were told to the Taliban, and it took a bit of persuading, but in the end, he agreed to do it. He was a very good sport.
Do you think there are many examples of expletives being used in diplomacy in that way?
I think there are lots, but you don't get to hear them very often. I was going to say, you asked the question of how we got the access. One of the reasons that we got the access to Sergei Ivanov is that he actually used to be a fantastic Beatles fan, and a colleague of ours went and filmed him a few years ago, was making a film about the Beatles in Russia. And so he'd established that relationship, although then he admitted, yes, he likes the Beatles, but he really likes Pink Floyd more.
Okay, back in the USSR. Now, the documentary is going to start screening in the UK on the 19th of January. I understand it's being shown in many countries in the world. Perhaps you can say where it's being shown, and also importantly, where at present it's not going to be shown. Russian television audiences aren't going to have a chance to see it. Is that right?
As far as I know, at the moment, there's no deal to show it in Russia. It is being broadcast in the UK. Pretty much every important European state broadcaster is showing it. It's being shown in America on the National Geographic Channel. NHK in Japan is showing it. The Australians are showing it. I think there's something like 14 co-producing countries. As for Russia, at the moment, nobody said they want it. But in my experience, once you make a series like this, one way or another, it finds its audience, which is to say that if it doesn't get shown by one of the state broadcasters in Russia, I'd be very surprised if it doesn't show up on the internet. On the other hand, as we've seen in the last month, things in Russia are changing all the time, and who knows? Let's hope. I'd really like it to be shown in Russia, because after all, this is a story about Russia.
You mentioned events of the last month. Your documentary was finished before what have been some quite substantial shifts on the Russian political landscape. Have you had to go back to the editing suites and make any changes? And what do events of the last few weeks, do they change your perception in any way?
Overall, they don't change the perception of what's happened in the past, because what's happened in the past has happened in the past. What we have done is we've changed the opening 2 minutes of the first program to remind people of the events of December and to remind people that Prime Minister Putin is now running for president. We've also changed the last couple minutes of the fourth program to bring it right up to date. And who knows? I mean, we still have another 3 weeks before that one broadcasts, and I suppose there's still time for us to change it again.
Russians often complain about the way the Western media organizations portray what's going on in their country. I mean, often the news agenda from Western media when it comes to Russia is stories about corruption, brutality in the armed forces, political repression, drug and alcohol addiction, often from the Russian point of view presenting quite a negative portrait of their country. Do you think that's a correct analysis, and can you understand why maybe they're not interested in screening your documentary?
Well, I can't say why the Russian state media haven't screened our documentary or haven't chosen so far to pick it up. What I can say is it seems to me, and the reason that I think we were able to get so many co-producers on board is that Russia, at the end of the day, is a big country which has a big international influence. Not just because of the nuclear weapons, not just because of the oil and the gas, but because Russia is a big international player. And when relations with the West are good, you see lots of things moving in other areas of the world, more cooperation and third-party interests. When things are going badly, you can see that just as well. So that's definitely true. Why the Western media portrays things in Russia the way they do, I'm afraid to say it's the old American news expression, if it bleeds, it leads. The most exotic stories are the ones that you can get on the air nowadays.
Final question. Given the access you've had to key political figures from Russia's recent history, do you think it would be a shame if their version of events wasn't delivered to the home audience?
No, I think it'd be a gigantic shame. On the one hand, it's a tricky thing because there are probably some things in the documentary that any Russian viewer knows by heart because they've lived through it, that we have to explain to a Western audience. On the other hand, I think there's probably plenty that they don't know, and certainly what they don't know and they haven't heard is absolutely unfiltered, the participants, the people, the Condoleezza Rices, the Colin Powells, the Mike McFalls, who's now the American ambassador to Moscow, but was President Obama's guy on Russia, ran all the nuclear negotiations, the people inside the START talks, people who were negotiating between Russia and Georgia before, during, and after the war there. These are people who really affected Russian viewers' lives, and to hear them explain what they did, how they did it, why they did it, and what their counterparties said, I think people would be really interested in, and I really, really hope that, if some Russian television executive out there is listening to this broadcast, they'll think, I should get this series.
That was Paul Mitchell, a director from Brook Lapping Productions, talking about the new series Putin, Russia and the West.